Approximately 30 years ago, being determined to become a major player in the GNSS provider marketplace, Europe began its journey to establish an independent satellite navigation program. Of course, there were obstacles, and like all adventures in space, there are a few, and there were a few villains, but many more heroes. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing two of our European GNSS heroes that nurtured Galileo from infancy to what it is today, and welcome you as they tell you our story, the story of the Galileo program. Jeremie Godet is currently head of secure connectivity and space surveillance at the European Commission, where he leads the team responsible for the Iris Square and GovSatcom initiatives. But in the period of our story tonight, revolves around, he was the technical leader of a political master plan that helped shape Galileo into what it is today. Since the very inception of Galileo, he's played a vital and evolving role for more than 20 years. Marco Falcone is currently the head of the Future Navigation Department at the European Space Agency, where he leads the preparation of future program missions to Earth, Moon, and beyond. But for the purpose of our story tonight, he is also the former program manager of the Galileo European GNSS program, which he helped shape from its very first days. In recognition of this outstanding work, and obviously that of all his team, and actually in one of the epic chapters that we will hear about tonight, Marco received the IO Interlo Award in 2018. Please join me with a round of applause in welcoming our Galileo superheroes tonight.
I joined Galileo program in 1999. I was in charge of the Galileo signal definition in a team that was writing the very first version of the Galileo mission requirement document. And I was convinced deep inside me that we would one day get close to where we are now, but I could never imagine that it was going to be such a long and bumpy ride.
And I joined the Galileo project office as employee number 5 in the year 2000. And I had the opportunity through these 25 years to work with top professionals in the European Space Agency. Many of them are here today with us. And after all, Jeremie, we are both Galileo dinosaurs of different species, but still understanding each other because we were talking the common language of engineers.
Galileo today is delivering world-class services to billions of users. 1 meter and 1 nanosecond is the ranging and timing accuracy of the open service, which is supported by 3 wideband signals from each satellite, including the widest signal of GNSS, the ALBOC. The high accuracy service delivers 20 centimeters worldwide, including in space. The search and rescue service, there are 30 NEO search and rescue payloads, which are provided to Costa Sasa, allowing to deliver almost real-time search and rescue service worldwide with an acknowledgement message to the distressed users. The OSNMA, since a few months, navigation message authentication, provides a kind of stamp in the navigation message of the open service and allow to avoid spoofing events. In a few months, the public regulated service will reach the initial operational capability The receiver has started to be fitted in the platforms. It's a very important and crucial service for Europe, security and sovereignty, with both military and civilian use. And next year, the emergency warning service will deliver alerts generated by civil protection and crisis management authorities directly in the area of concern to your smartphone, and even if the telecom network is disrupted or saturated. My friends and colleagues Eric Schatz and Miguel Mantega, I don't see them, will tell you more tomorrow on the Galileo status presentation.
And this is our journey. It's a journey of 30 years. We will go through the different episodes that characterize our climbing to the top of the 30 years mountain. Because working in GNSS is like climbing a mountain. There are highs and lows. There are moments of glory and moments of pain. I can tell you, because this is very hard. To go through the mountain, it is so hard. And it is through a sustained period of time. This is why, to get on the top, you need to have a lot of passion, a lot of motivation, a lot of fun. Because if you don't have fun, you are going to give up.
Yes, Marco, passion, fun, and I would like to add perseverance. The Galileo journey was like rocky climbs, sometimes with wild weather. We made it to the top just to discover that the next peak was even more impressive. But let's let's drop the metaphors and let's get to the real story, Marco.
So let's start from the beginning. Where does our story begins? So let's be in context. 1993. GPS was declaring initial operational capability and was announcing that in 95 would have had full operational capability. In the same year, in 1993, GLONASS was declared operational. Where is Europe? We didn't have a navigation system. And at that time, there were studies that were run by the European Space Agency and French Space Agency, French Civil Aviation. And they were conducting studies, there was a famous meeting that occurred in the mountains of Belgium, close to Redoux, where the concept of European GNSS was conceived. It consisted of two steps. There was a first step called GNSS-1, a so-called GPS navigation overlay service, and the GNSS-2 that was supposed to be an independent constellation. So ESA and DC joined forces already in 94 because Inmarsat 3 was putting through an invitation to tender to lease a transponder for the first step of GNSS, GNSS-1, for GPS navigation overlay service. But our birthday of the 30th year starts from the council at ministerial level. We held every 3 years in European Space Agency a council at ministerial level that approved the first program, the first European institutional program on satellite navigation. That was ARTES-9 for Advanced Research in Telecommunication. At that time, navigation was not existing. We had a telecommunication. We can say that in October 95, European satellite navigation was born.
Yes, it started 30 years ago, but at that time we didn't have what it takes to start such an ambitious program. For that, you need first a name. Second, you need a clear ambition. And third, you need political support to get the necessary budget. The name and the ambition came out in 1999 in a communication from the European Commission. The name was chosen after Galileo Galilei, the famous Italian astronomer, physicist, and mathematician. And I think this was partly to irritate the engineers because they love acronyms. But they actually loved it. Because Galileo is a symbol of perseverance and scientific integrity. As far as the ambition is concerned, this communication stated that Galileo had to be more or less similar to GPS, with similar orbits, similar number of satellites. It had to be able to function in an interoperable way with GPS, but also in a standalone way. And it had a very strong civilian focus with a strong security dimension as well. But it's one thing to convince the engineers. It's another one to convince the minister of the member states to get the support and the budget. And it simply takes an extraordinary political leader to take up the cause. And of course, many would claim that they are father of Galileo program. But there was actually one real mother of the Galileo program. Ladies and gentlemen, let us hear Loyola de Palacio.
Galileo es, si Europa de verdad quiere aportar una alternativa, un complemento al sistema actualmente en funcionamiento, el único sistema en funcionamiento, el GPS americano de posicionamiento global por satélite, y si quiere aportar una alternativa complementaria que refuerce el conjunto de los sistemas y que permita el desarrollo tecnológico, el desarrollo industrial, la capacidad y la autonomía de Europa y de su industria en las apuestas y en el juego internacional.
She is gone, but her voice still inspires. I'm going to tell you a story. When Loyola de Palacio presented the proposal for starting the development phase of Galileo, the first time in the council, Transport Council, she received a kind of lukewarm reactions, if not icicle, from certain member states that we'll not name. Why do we need this Galileo? We have GPS, it's free of charge. Who will pay that? What about the security, the NATO? Never mind. Like any normally constituted person would have simply say, we give up. She gathered the team and she said, the only negotiation that you lose is the one that you do not start. We have heard the objections of the member states, and we are going to address them one by one. So we had no other choice than to convince the ministers. And at the next council, 3 months later, we did it, inspired by our conviction that we will make it.
At the same time, we were starting the first studies, design studies, for defining the architecture of a Galileo system. This is my first ion. I think we all remember what was our first ion. It was Salt Lake City in the year 2000. I had the honor to be there with one of the pioneers in our team of satellite navigation, Rafael Lucas. And to be honest with you, I would have never thought 25 years after to be in front of you, in particular Professor Brad Parkinson. It's a great honor for me. We see here a first drawing of the Galileo overall architecture. We had a global component at the time that was delivering both navigation and integrity services, because at that time, you remember very well, Ilaria, you were working with me on integrity, we were defining the integrity concept and the navigation together. We had also the search and rescue service that was from the very beginning integral part of the system. And I have to say there was a service-oriented view from the very beginning. So putting user dimension first. We had also a regional component that was supposed to compute, to determine integrity and disseminate it through the medium Earth orbit, but this did not, we abandoned it later on, and also the local component didn't happen. But actually the global concept and the constellation that we defined at that time, the orbit and the number of satellites, has been maintained until now.
December 2001, a letter from the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Paul Wolfowitz. Dear Ministry, I'm writing to you to convey my concern about the security ramification for future NATO operation if the European Union proceeds with the Galileo satellite navigation service that would overlay the spectrum of the GPS military M-code signal. I urge you to convey this security concern to your Minister of Transport in advance of the 6th of December meeting to review the Galileo mandate. Oh gosh, we have a problem to solve. The initial Galileo signal plan does not work for NATO. But that letter was actually very useful to put the pressure on both sides of the Atlantic to solve the problem. The EU head of delegation, Heinz Hilbrecht, agreed in principle to modify the signal. But we had first to define jointly the criteria for compatibility and interoperability between the two systems. And then the EU side would agree to modify its signal in compliance with this criteria. The challenge was accepted, but the outcome was far from being simple. It took a marathon of meetings, days and nights on both sides of the Atlantic to agree these highly classified compatibility criteria, for which you see here the unclassified cover pages. Sweden helped a lot by landing their bilateral security agreements with the United States, their castle, Näsby Slott, in the north of Stockholm, the famous ice bar in Stockholm, as well as a very respectful co-chair of the security discussion, Goran Axelsson. The US GPS wing helped a lot as well by landing a formidable chief engineer, Colonel Richard Reeser, as well as Brian Titus, and their incredibly smart companion with a beautiful mustache. You will recognize, of course, John Betts. He's not here tonight, unfortunately. We had great time shaping signal, defining highly classified scenarios, which are still valid today and important for NATO, and laying the ground for the next generation of civilian signal in spirit of mutual trust and sincere cooperation.
So, following the EU-US agreement was necessary to bring the frequency into use. We had a frequency filing expiring in June 2006. So we had was a race against time. Bring frequencies up, demonstrate technology in orbit. This is our first Galileo in orbit demonstrator, was called GOVE. GOVE is an acronym, back to acronyms of engineer, Galileo in orbit validation element, but was a fantastic name, because Giove means Jupiter in Italian, and it was named after the famous discoveries of the moons of Jupiter used by Galileo as a mean to compute a longitude at sea. So a very, very good name. It was new space before time. All the ingredients of new space were there. Fast. We developed from contract signature to acceptance of a satellite was developed in only 2 years. Was low cost. We were reusing a satellite bus, built by a company that was spin-off of a university of students. That was the University of Surrey. We were using commercial equipment upgraded for space. To give you an example, Intel 386 was the first time we were flying in space an Intel 386 computer. We were pioneers, really. Launch from Baikonur with a Soyuz launcher in 28th of October 2005. I remember a number of stories. I was in the Mission Control Center. You have to know that on board the satellite there was a minimum onboard loader, software loader, nothing more than that. And I remember Miguel Mantega, the current program manager of Galileo, that was tweaking the telemetry tracking control station power in order to be able to upload the software to the spacecraft. That was commanded from a laptop in the Mission Control Center. I remember myself with a team in the station in Chilbolton in the United Kingdom where we were doing the first in-orbit testing. And we had with us the first Galileo experimental test receiver from Settentrion. And we said, let's not just measure the signal with a high-gain antenna, we need to try with receiver, the first Galileo receiver. And where do we mount the receiver antenna? No, you cannot drill on the roof of a station. It's not allowed. We take the car. We go to a supermarket. The bus was approaching. We get a pallet. We load on the car. We put it on the roof, and here it is. Antenna installed, cable through the window, and we could acquire the first signal. And we were very proud of this plot. We all signed it. And from that day, every time we do the in-orbit testing of a satellite of Galileo, we all sign that plot. It's the first, and this is really history, is our first signal. So to the same questions, we had two different answers. Jove A was a very risky program. For mitigating the risk, we decided to introduce a second in-orbit demonstrator that was Jove B. Jove B was built by Galileo Industries under leadership of Astrum Germany. And as I said, it was same question, different answer. So much more representative from technology point of view. We were flying the first passive hydrogen maser clock in orbit, delivering the performance that are behind the Galileo system today. And for the first time, a triple frequency spectrum. But also that was a bumpy ride. We launched the satellite Jove B in the night. And I remember being with a launch and early orbit phase. It was in Fucino, in Italy. And the satellite was not behaving nominally after injection. We were actually attitude control. We were not able to stabilize attitude control, and we were losing altitude, a big problem. You know, we had supported the launch. I was in the shift 1, shift A, and then we were passing to shift B. I remember going to the hotel. You go to bed, and you have a big problem, and you think, my God, what are we going to do? Are we going to recover the spacecraft? I wake up 3-4 hours after. I take my car. I go to the Mission Control Center, and the people had fixed the problem, had found the root cause. So it was, this is a reaction wheel, it was mounted with the wrong polarity. And this is industry excellence, because industry makes the difference in what we do. They were able to get, Astrum Germany was able to get down to the engineers that developed and installed the wheel, and they could tell the operators from the behavior it is behaving in the completely opposite way. So probably maybe has been mounted in the wrong way, change polarity, and they did, through the commanding, they could basically complement the commands. And doing that, we found this was the root cause and the problem was solved. So we could recover the spacecraft and then run the operations through a very long time. Design lifetime of Jove A, Jove B, 27 months. Jove A, 16 years of operation. And Jove B, 4 years of operation. So well beyond the lifetime. This was quite an important achievement.
Between 2007 and 2010, as the program was starting to get serious, we also needed to put the governance on the right track. As you remember, until 2007, the governance model was based on a public-private partnership, where the public was supposed to pay 1/3 of the system that was mainly used to finance the in-orbit validation phase, and the private sector was supposed to pay 2/3 of the system for the deployment of the system. And it almost looked credible and real, because when we launched the concession contract, we received two very credible offers from industry, from two consortia. But at one point, these two consortia decided to merge into one single group, one single offer, and started to be much less interested to receive any risk, to transfer any risk. So the pain became bigger than the gain, and it just did not work. There was no business model. But we were stuck. We had no plan B, because the public budget was already committed in the in-orbit phase. So the Commission took notes and completely redesigned the governance to become a fully public-funded model. And the kudos goes to Paul Verhoef, who did that in a very smart and elegant manner. And also there, some political leader, Jacques Barrot, from the European Commission, had to convince his colleagues to find 2 to 3 billion euros of unused budgets from somewhere. This was also the time when the relation between the Commission and ESA started to improve to a higher level. Marco did not insist enough, but I think we should remind. Less than 2 years after having agreed with our American colleagues the signal Galileo, less than 2 years, there was already a satellite in space transmitting this signal. The Commission, I can tell you, we're really impressed. So we can trust ESA. And now that we have a budget, we pass on to ESA to launch the procurement of the deployment phase.
This was not an easy landing, because it was a completely new role for ESA. Normally, the system prime role is done by industry. Was never done before. So I remember looking at each other in the project with the support of our technical director and the inspector general. So what do? We started a procurement breaking down the system in a number of work packages, segments. The objective was, on one end, to introduce competitiveness, industrial competitiveness, and also at the same time to diversify the different industrial landscape to create a strong industrial ecosystem. To give you an idea, when you define this sort of configuration, if I take the Galileo requirements today, there are many engineers here, is 40% of our requirements are interfaces. So, and we have to define the interfaces between the different packages, not only technical, also contractual, because you have, for instance, to hand over from the system layer a receiver in order to be able to test the satellite. So I remember all the discussion on the so-called customer undertakings from contract A to contract B. So quite a complex exercise. And the challenge was also Galileo is a system. how are we going to run the system activities? And this is where I really tell you, and for the young guys like me, I advise you take maximum benefit of a networking, knowing people, meeting the ION. I met here Keith McDonald and many other people that were working on GPS at the time. Keith McDonald was the co-founder of Navtech GPS. So we were doing courses together. And I remember a call where I told him, okay, do you have advice? What do you suggest us to do? And he introduced me to the concept of the system engineering technical assistance. That was what typically do in the US. When you have a government procurement from a team that is very limited, you need to structure it with a strong industrial backing. So you created a concept called the system engineering technical assistant. And he was sending me online to understand and learn about it. And we did it, and still today, in Galileo first generation and second generation, we have system engineering technical assistant contract. So the power of ION networking.
One of the objectives of the EU-US agreement of 2004 was to jointly work on an improved signal for interoperability between Galileo E1OS and GPS L1C with the purpose of maximizing the performance for the civilian signal. This was a key request from the European side. I had the honor to co-chair the working group in charge of that, together with an incredibly smart GPS chief engineer, Colonel Mark Cruz, who I believe is in the room. We were playing with multi-level signals instead of the usual binary signal, having a very constrained framework, which is the classified compatibility criteria to comply with, and we jointly developed the MBOC with two different configurations, the TMBOC for the GPS L1C and the CBOC for Galileo. And you will see in this picture not only John Betts that I talked before, Chris Egarty, I'm sure he's in the room, Sean Lenehan, Jean-Luc Isler, José Ángel Avila Rodriguez, obviously, Gunther Hein, John Owen, and Tony Pratt, who are the inventors of the NBOC. I consider they are some kind of Jedis of signal shaping. You shall adopt NBOC. And actually, it worked. This became an international standard. Not only GPS and Galileo use this signal, but many other constellations. Between 2010 and 2015, we were starting to get some in-orbit testing results. And not everything was working as expected. So we had to readapt a few things. The first feature that was to be reprofiled was the Galileo Global Integrity System concept. It's a global integrity provision scheme according to Safety of Life civil aviation specifications. It was a key feature of the Galileo program, the key initial idea of the original design. But it had to be abandoned. Why? For various reasons. The 6 seconds time to alert on a global scale was too difficult to achieve. We had to deploy more than 30 stations worldwide connected in real time. That was difficult from the security point of view. There were also some liability issues, complex liability issues. And there was an entire facility, the integrity processing facility, which had to be removed from the control center. Javier Benedito will remember this because he took the decision, difficult decision, during a dedicated review, the System Delta CDR. So this created two fundamental issues, two fundamental questions for the Galileo program. First, how to continue to serve aviation as a key priority community. And second, what to do with the spare bits that were released by the removal of the integrity message. And that was almost 80% of the data rate that was released from the Galileo signals.
So the first issue was we removed the global integrity, but still in our mind we wanted to still keep the usage of open service for civil aviation. But there was no concrete plan on the table, and we were having difficulties. And I remember one evening meeting together. Was the evening before our program board of navigation, where we gather with the delegates and discuss about the status of the different programs. By coincidence, we had a dinner together with a former project manager of Galileo, of EGNOS, that was Didier Flamand. Many of you know him. And we were having dinner together and complaining with each other that EGNOS, Galileo, were not able to put together such a plan. And then we were together with our respective system engineers. One of them, Jorgen, is here with us tonight. And we said, let's draft the plan. We started defining the different plan, the different steps, and we were convinced it worked. We had a concept that was quite well established, well based. And we were in a restaurant, so we took a napkin. And we wrote it down. We wrote it down with the different dates, the different steps, that actually the day after we presented to our delegates. This was the open service for civil aviation plan. So the point is, write it down, and we also said sign it, because we are committed to achieve it, and we did. And it's not by coincidence that the International Civil Aviation Organization in 2023 adopted the standard for using Galileo for open signal for civil aviation. So, and today we have both EGNOS V3 being prepared on that basis under the leadership of Pierre-Yves Dussault, and the horizontal ARIME also is being built.
As far as the issue of the unused bits was concerned, the dilemma was either to redesign the Galileo navigation message and make it look like the GPS one with lower data rate, or to leave this unused capacity for a possible future use. As the chairman of the Galileo Signal Task Force, I must say that I was quite pushed and under pressure from several members to simply mimic the GPS navigation message. That would have been good for interoperability, but I was not totally convinced. So we did some call for ideas with the member states, with industry, university, and we received a lot of really great ideas how to use this capacity. So we decided to go for the second option. And actually, many of the new services of Galileo are kind of born out of this design failure of the safety of life, which became an opportunity. This is the case of the open service navigation authentication, INAV improvements, the return link of the search and rescue, and the future emergency warning satellite service.
So we are now at the end of 2012. We had done in 2011 and 2012 the first two in-orbit validation launches, where we had 4 satellites in orbit, and we conceived a so-called in-orbit validation phase, where we had 4 satellites in orbit to validate the system, and the satellites were passing over Europe 2 to 3 hours per day. So there was an intense preparation, because our ultimate objective was to compute positioning using only Galileo means. This is what the in-orbit validation phase was conceived. So a lot of intense preparation with the whole team at all levels, and the key question was, will it work? Will we have a success?
A historical achievement for Europe, with the first Galileo-only position fix performed. This is the navigation laboratory at ESA's center in the Netherlands. On the screens, the data coming from space. This is where the signals transmitted by the 4 Galileo satellites currently orbiting the Earth are computed. For the first time ever, the 4 satellites have been activated together to transmit their navigation messages. In the lab, ESA experts were anxious to see if theory was confirmed by fact, if the receivers would indeed give the correct position, a fix of longitude, latitude and altitude.
Today it's a very important day, it's a milestone for the program. For the first time, we have done the first positioning using European-only means. The 4 IOV satellites, launched in 2011 and 2012, and a network of ground stations. Of course, it's less spectacular than a launch, but for us, it's as important. It's the first time we know that Galileo works, and we are now very confident for the full deployment.
So it was a great success. Galileo works, and it works well. So the system was validated in orbit, verified, as you said today. And then we were ready to go fast forward with the deployment of a constellation. So we were approaching August 2014 for the third launch. Failure. And when we had 2 problems. Problem number 1, the Soyuz Fregat upper stage positioned the satellites at 4,000 kilometers below the semi-major axis, so 4,000 kilometers lower, and in a highly eccentric orbit. So I don't know those of you that ever been, every time we do a launch, we have a so-called crisis communication plan. And that evening, I was in a crisis communication loop. The problem is that the launcher was declaring successful injection in orbit. The operation team in the launch and early orbit phase could not find the spacecraft. And they were saying, no, we can tell you, mission control in Kourou, we can tell you that actually the satellites are not where they're supposed to be. And there was all this discussion. We had the best luck, I would say, that the launch and early orbit phase was done by the ESOC, our European Space Agency Operations Center in Darmstadt, that was using a station in New Norcia, in Australia, that was also tracking the Soyuz upper stage. So thanks to that, they realized, going back to the measurements of that station, that actually the injection was wrong. And then they could start a search in order to look for the spacecraft, and they found them, actually. And this is when problem number 2 kicks in. For both satellites, only 1 solar array was deployed. That is also a major lack, because 1 only solar array still allows to operate the spacecraft in safe mode. So thanks to that, we could work out a procedure. Actually, was the system to deploy the solar array for 1 array that didn't have enough power, and then we modified and we recovered also the second solar array. But still the problem remained because we were 4,000 kilometers lower. Some of you may remember that in September 2014 I did a presentation to the ION, where I presented in the GNSS panel that our intention was to recover the spacecraft. And I really thank you for all the support. You are believing in us that we would have done it. And let me say this is ESA at its best. Is when you put together all disciplines. It's a very complex problem. You have mission analysis in order to compute the orbit you want to go to. You need at the same time not to lose too much fuel because you want to preserve the lifetime of the mission. You have to take into account that, for instance, Earth sensors, when you are too low, they cannot allow pointing to the Earth because basically they are too low, so we needed to modify that. And also you have Doppler effects, power dynamic range effects, so we had to compute the right orbit to be used also from a navigation signal perspective. And we did that. This was the most remarkable success in recovering emission. We did that, and today the launch-free satellites we were able to broadcast a navigation signal, even if it is in test mode. They are fully operational also from search and rescue point of view, and they were a fantastic tool in order to be able to demonstrate the Einstein relativistic theory, because they are in a highly elliptical orbit equipped with two passive hydrogen maser, very stable clocks. So they were very useful for the scientific community. Especially, they offer today a capability to validate in orbit new onboard software patches, new signals. For instance, in next year, we will introduce a testing in order to be able to introduce signal authentication service at the level of V6 signal, and we will do that starting from testing with these two satellites. So an excellent asset in orbit in the end.
But the launch-free anomaly was not the only problem we had to face. As we said, many highs and many lows. In 2016, we started to experience an unusual number of failure of atomic clocks. Despite this was not seen by the users, this was declared in a transparent way to the community. Each Galileo satellite was equipped with two passive hydrogen maser clock and two rubidium clocks. And at that time, we had 5 failures on PHM clocks, 4 on IOV satellite and 1 on FOC satellite. They were linked to a so-called bad plasma anomaly, which appeared to be linked to having too much switching on and off of the clocks. The PHM was a pretty new technology, so we knew we were taking a bit of a risk with this. But the mitigation of this risk was the use of the rubidium clocks, because they were much more prudent technology. But we started to have failure of the rubidium clocks as well. Actually, on some brandly new launch satellites, FOC satellites. So the situation was quite critical. We have set up an anomaly review board with all the ESA experts, industry experts. After a very complex analysis, failure analysis, excluding some scenario, they found the root cause. They found the root cause to be a change of fabrication of a very small electronic component called the fit-through, which is probably 50 cents of a euro, and that could not operate anymore in the same temperature range. And we could trace each clocks on each Galileo satellite that were faulty.
So you can imagine the difficulty. You have a satellite flying 23,000 kilometers away. How are you going to diagnose the problem and reproduce it in order to be able to find the root cause and then have the solution? And this is where technical excellence, industrial commitment are very important. We were making, thanks to the intense work of the equipment manufacturers, the clock manufacturers, but also the satellite manufacturers, the operations teams that contributed to it, and also our technical directorate. We have navigation laboratories at ESTEC, where we have our clocks, and we could reproduce the conditions of the satellites and find out the root cause. We changed the operational configuration of the spacecraft. The design configuration was to have one rubidium and one passive hydrogen maser on, and we changed to switch off the RAFs because we wanted to preserve lifetime because of the problem mentioned, and we decided to keep both passive hydrogen maser on in order to be able to avoid the ignition, the risk of ignition of the plasma and losing then the passive hydrogen maser. And this required a change of a temperature control on board the satellites, so a complete redesign of a thermal subsystem that actually we did. Today, clocks are the pride of Galileo. And I have to say, it's like young children, that they give you problems when they are in their infancies, but then when they go along the way and they grow, they give you a lot of satisfaction. But once the problems were fixed with the first Galileo satellites, it was the moment to accelerate as much as possible the deployment. And this was the period 2015 to 2020. We had 2015 was a record year. We had 3 Soyuz launches, times 2 satellites per launch means we put in orbit 6 satellites that year. And launches in March 2015, September 2015, December 2015 means a space segment launch campaign 5 to 6 months. You have an idea of a commitment of a team that was basically 50% of the time of that year in Kourou running the launch preparation. And even better, 2016, when we had the first Ariane 5 launch, meaning European access to space on one end, and on the other end, accelerated deployment because we could launch 4 satellites with 1 launcher. And this, as far as I know, is a record. Never a GNSS has deployed 4 satellites with a launch. GLONASS has deployed 3, has been able to. Beidou has deployed 3 satellites, but never any other GNSS has deployed 4 satellites with a launch. We had to redesign the Ariane 5 upper stage to be able to go to the medium Earth orbit. We had to build a new dispenser in order to be able to host 4 spacecrafts. And then the spacecrafts, the concept was you deploy 2 at a time. For the operations team in the launch early orbit phase is like juggling 4 balls in the air. Imagine you have 4 satellites in very critical operations to run. And for this, you have 2 teams, basically. A first team concentrating on the first 2 couple deployed, and then the second team working hand in hand together. I like a lot this picture of our former director, Paul Verhoef, that you can see staying between 4 satellites, telemetry being displayed in a launch and early orbit phase mission control center. This was quite good.
With the first successful launch of Ariane 5, we achieved 18 satellites in orbit, and that was a size of the constellation that was deemed sufficient to be able to commit to service performance through the Galileo Initial Service Declaration, 15th of December 2016. In parallel, EUSPA, they had concluded a very large operation and service provision contract. And they were ready to take over the service provision, to take the responsibility of the service provision. And even more, with the Galileo Initial Service, it was a declaration which convinced the manufacturers, receivers, and chipsets to adopt Galileo. I remember before the Initial Service Declaration, there was one company, a Spanish company called BQ, was the only one to make a smartphone with Galileo inside. And only 1 year after, about 95% of all the new phones being sold were equipped with Galileo. So all the kudos goes to EUSPA. And in particular, Carlo De Doriz, his executive director, who really pushed for this milestone to be a success. And I remember at that time, EUSPA had developed a nice tool online where there was a model you could follow the number of Galileo receiver equipped and being put on the market. It was a model based on the production rates of the manufacturers. So initially it went 100, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. And as the big player started to adopt Galileo, like Broadcom, Qualcomm, TSMC, ST Microelectronics, the figures started to increase exponentially. It was really a nice moment, 16 years after the beginning, to see that.
December 2016.
I even remember starting a meeting where I looked at the numbers, and at the end of the meeting declaring that we now have 30,000 more Galileo receivers since the beginning of the meeting. It was really fun. And launch after launch, we could see the performance of the system, especially the ranging performance, increasing, improving over time, also with the deployment of the ground. And we are kind of obsessed with this improvement, until
2019.
Suddenly, on the 10th of July 2019, to our complete stupefaction, the navigation message of Galileo started to diverge very, very strongly. A technical incident related to the ground segment ground infrastructure upgrades resulted in an interruption of the Galileo navigation message. But more worryingly, when EUSPA started to reboot the system, it was not working. So we had to stop this transmission, put together EUSPA, ESA, industry, operators together to analyze every logs of the system. The incident impacting the time and the orbit's determination function, and it were caused by a series of completely unrelated events that impacting the synchronization of elements in the ground mission segment. And this prevented the correct generation of navigation message, and as a result, it stopped the uplink to the entire constellation. And overall, it took 1 week to restore the system, until we determine exactly the root cause of each of these 3 different unrelated events. It was a big shock for the program. An independent inquiry board composed of very high-level staff from defense, aviation, space was set up, and they did a complete review of the program. They looked at the root cause analysis. They issued a set of very strong recommendations. The Galileo program set up an action plan to reply to all these actions. Some of them took several years to be implemented. And since then, there were never any service incidents affecting the user, such like this one. And I think even last year, we had a major upgrade of an extraordinarily complex ground segment, which went absolutely smoothly.
Indeed. A failure makes you stronger, is what declared Eric Schaap in the ION in the GNSS panel in 2019. And it's true, because thanks to that, we introduced a number of improvements in the overall system, and in particular in the ground segment. We introduced, in case of restart of a system, a faster convergence time. It was taking too long to restart, so we had it much faster. We introduced a navigation extended mode that, in case of system failure, was capable to introduce a graceful degradation, allowing the system to work without a navigation message generation up to 1 week. And then also, I think, we introduced a complete new concept of a pre-operational chain, meaning that you have when you migrate to a new version of the system, you have a sort of shadowing between the current version in operation and the next version. You do that until you see that all parameters are nominal, and then you switch from version n to version n+1 in a seamless way. This is what allowed, as you say, in April last year, a seamless migration of a ground segment to the so-called System Build 2.0 that will be the one used for the PRS in initial operational capability. And this is thanks to the work of industry. Today, I can say that the Galileo ground segment is the largest and more complex ground infrastructure ever developed, qualified, deployed by Europe. And it is the work of industry, doing the ground control segment, the ground mission segment, and also the cyber security that was introduced, and qualification was completed after a long period of pain, after almost 2 years of intense qualification. But starting in 2022, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the interruption of the Ariane 5 launches from Kourou, we went into a very difficult period, the difficult access to space. We didn't have access to space. We shipped our satellites on the 18th of February to Kourou, where we have our launch base, for a Soyuz launcher, for a Soyuz launch. And few days after, on the 22nd of February, Russia suspended Soyuz launch operation. Basically, the Soyuz team from Russia left the base. And I remember the team calling me. I was at the time the program manager of Galileo, calling and saying, we don't have a launcher anymore. What do we do? Shall we stay or shall we go? And it was a very difficult decision, because I remember in those days, the war is still going on today, and people saying, no, but this cannot be the thing, this situation will stabilize, it cannot be, leave the satellites in Kourou, and we will see what to do, just wait, it's too risky to repatriate the satellites. And ultimately, we repatriated the satellites in November. And satellites are not conceived for being kept into a container. So we had basically 10 satellites in storage. You can imagine the type of programs: obsolete components, possible degradation while staying inside the container, of course, temperature control with the passive hydrogen meter inside, but quite complicated. We had no experience for maintaining satellites for such a long time in storage. What type of retesting you have to do once you take the satellites out of storage? So no experience before, and was a very difficult period. And this is where, in these moments of difficulty, our strong EU-US cooperation came to the rescue. We are very thankful for what has been put in place, thanks to the cooperation between the EU and the US, because we were able, thanks to put together a launch 12 and 13 using a SpaceX Falcon 9. This was a complicated agreement at the highest level in Washington and in Brussels, because you can imagine our satellites carry EU classified information and items and documentation. They are crypto-controlled items, and they had to be launched from the American base of Cape Canaveral, with all the difficulties around that. For us, it was a fantastic experience. We were going through already 11 launches before launching with SpaceX, plus the 2 Jove-A-B launch. And we were already perfectioning our launch campaign capability, but with SpaceX, we were asked to keep to the pace of a launch campaign of SpaceX, reducing to half the duration of a launch campaign, and also introducing very lean processes. Just to give you an idea, from the contract signature with SpaceX to the launch, it was only 9 months. A very efficient process. And then the cherry on the cake also is that on the Falcon 9 upper stage, we had a camera, was equipped with a camera. So we could, for the first time, experience a direct injection in orbit. And this is what happened in April 2024, when we were able to see the injection of a satellite in orbit. You see it here. So now we will go back to Kourou for launch 14 in December. We will launch with Ariane 6, so we will resume European access to space, but I want really to thank the United States for having come to the rescue in this difficult moment that we experienced.
Thank you, yes. So here we are, Marco. We made it to the top, and we have a very nice view.
But we all know it in GNSS. Our journey is never finished. And here we are. We always go from mountain to mountain.
And
so new peaks are in front of us.
Indeed. The next peak looks even more impressive. The Galileo second generation is on the horizon. The G2 satellites will be a much more powerful satellite with fully flexible payload, electric propulsion, advanced navigation antenna, inter-satellite links, advanced atomic clock ensemble configurations. The satellites are being built in such a way that they can be reprogrammed while in orbit. This is a feature which will allow to make adaptation in response to market changes. And there are 2 parallel contracts where 6 satellites are built in Italy by Thales and United Space, and 6 satellites in Germany by Airbus. The next one, I like it. IRI². IRI² is the next flagship program of the EU after Galileo and Copernicus. This is a global multi-orbital constellation to provide secured communication worldwide. What's the link with PNT? I will not tell you now. I invite you to attend the panel session tomorrow where we'll speak about that.
But we're not stopping here. We're going toward a new layer. So GNSS 1 was geostationary layer. GNSS 2, medium Earth orbit layer. We are going for, let's call it GNSS 3, the low Earth orbit layer. It will introduce very powerful capabilities, I think, augmenting Galileo and EGNOS, introducing additional robustness, resilience, thanks to the usage of new frequencies, and also the capability to deploy in a very fast and agile way new services, like, for instance, indoor positioning or messaging capabilities. So this is like at the time of Jove, where we were able to complete the development of the satellites in 2 years. We will now go for the launch of our first LEO PNT Pathfinders, Pathfinders A, that will be launched in a window between December and March next year, and be put in orbit. And if you remember, also for Jove, we chose a fantastic name. We have also, I'm happy also to reveal here the name we have decided for the LEO PNT, for the ESA mission of LEO PNT, that will be Celeste. Celeste is the name of a daughter of Galileo Galilei, that was a nun, and with her, Galileo had a fantastic relationship, and we decided on her name to give this fantastic name to the ESA mission on Leo PNT. But we don't stop here. All what we have learned on Earth, we want to project forward. We want to go to navigate into the stars, and for that we are preparing the lunar communication and navigation system called Moonlight, and after that Mars, for the Mars communication and navigation infrastructure, so-called Marconi mission. Like we did in 2004 for interoperability on Earth, we are going to work with NASA, JAXA, to define the LunaNet standard that will be the standard for navigate into the stars.
So this is the Galileo story, Marco. This is our story as well. And when we look back to the 30 years, we have seen the recipe for the success. The first is the political will, where individual women and men really made a difference.
The second is technical excellence, both in the moment of glory, but also when the going gets tough.
The third is to always take into account the user need and change the course if they are not satisfied.
The fourth is industrial strength. Industry always allowed us to boost and advance always fast forward.
And the fifth one is cooperation, international cooperation, especially here with you guys in the US.
And now, Jeremie, it's time to take our backpack and move to the next mountain, to continue all together to shape the future of satellite navigation. Remember, learn from the past
and look to the future.
I must confess, I'm slightly even moved emotionally. Marco and Jeremie and Marco. These two heroes sat for many years at the very tip of an iceberg, supported by countless engineers, many of them actually present today with us, and others who sadly are not longer with us. Together, they turned Galileo into the European navigation system that we know today. I would like to open the floor to any questions you may have, those that you always wanted to ask but never quite dare, those that tortured them for years, could not speak about, but tonight, finally, they can share with you. Tonight is your opportunity to get all the answers.
That was so awesome, I can't even believe it. And I have to congratulate you for what you have done. I will give you one short little story. There was a meeting held in Washington sometime in your infancy. And it was a group within Washington who was deadly opposed to what you were doing. They called me in, they wanted me to give a presentation, and they assumed, of course, I was going to say, terrible idea, let's shoot it down. I didn't. On the contrary, I said, from the standpoint of the user community, Galileo is one of the greatest ideas I've ever heard, and I think we ought to support it as a country. I don't know whether that had any impact at all, but I, for one, have always applauded what you do, and by golly, you pulled it off. Wow.
Yeah, thanks. That was an excellent plenary. What do you see are the major challenges in taking this now operational system and maintaining those operations over the long term?
Yeah, I would say what we have learned. At the very beginning, we were always looking to performance, best accuracy, high accuracy positioning, etc. We have learned through time how important it is to guarantee continuity for the user. And I think this aspect, when you design a GNSS, is very important. Always to think the user in mind, to have the user in mind. Because in the end, you have a huge responsibility for people say there are 5 billion users of Galileo, so you have quite a responsibility. And this is what we learned, I have to say, through the service incident together with the team of USPA and the Commission and the operations team, how important it is the user dimension to be translated into the continuity and the robustness. It's no surprise as a designer when we go to the operation team and we tell Gerrit Pont, that is the responsible in USPA for operation, do it faster, introduce this capability, and the operations are more pushing back, saying, it needs to be robust, it needs to be verified, we need to be sure of the procedures. So for me, this is an important point.
I would add that definitely to maintain the skills, to maintain the people. Yes. I think one of the key success of Galileo is that you have people here in the room that are working for 30 years, 25 years, are still there. So to maintain new generation of people that will be ready to continue and work for 10 or 20 years in this kind of program. This is definitely a key challenge. On the industry as well, I think we need to keep on challenging you a bit, because to keep you being competitive and to avoid the syndrome of making the same thing but in a much more expensive way. So we need to keep challenging you all the time, otherwise you will go in the wrong way. And finally, the political support that remains forever. At the moment, we are tabling a new budget for the next 7 years. We don't know yet what will be the outcome, but I hope we'll have the political support to continue these programs.
Essential. This is essential, the leadership of the political sector, fundamental.
We have a question at the back. I think it was Tom, right?
Yeah.
Great. Also, if you mention your name, affiliation.
Hi, Tom Powell from Aerospace. Good to see you, Jeremie, again. With the success of your program, how important is backward compatibility to Galileo going forward?
Yeah, this is very important, because every time we introduce a new feature, we need to make sure, of course, that we don't step back. And this is fundamental. So the definition of both of the signal towards the user and also at the level of infrastructure. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. And this is why it requires a lot of qualification, verification, testing. To give you an idea, I think for the system build 2.0 migration, we spent 18 to 24 months of qualification testing. And this was very critical. And then at the level of a signal. For instance, now when we are going to introduce the Celeste layer, the Leo PNT, we need absolutely to make sure that it's an innovative signal, but at the same time maintains backward compatibility with the user, for instance, of a medium Earth orbit Galileo satellites.
Yeah, and this is maybe why we have the tendency to grow, to get bigger on the new satellites rather to get smaller. In the Galileo second generation, we're actually adding new signals, but maintaining the old one as well. So the more legacy we have, the more power we need and capacity to deliver this signal. Some users, communities, particularly aviation, they need things for tens of years before changing them. So, yeah. But the backward compatibility is a must. We can't negotiate with that.
Logan.
Hi, Logan Scott. I applaud what you've done. I've watched and admired your progress over the years. My question is basically this. Technology is moving forward. Innovation is always possible. And the question is, how do you intend to manage innovation now that you've got a system up? How do you move forward with different things? Obviously, with the G2G, you've got phased array, you've got software-defined radar, you've got a lot of interesting parts in play. But how do you intend to manage innovation in an orderly manner and continue to move the system forward?
Thanks for the question, Logan, because we are exactly in the process to define the future navigation programs for the future, actually. And we think in the team, in our directorate of navigation, we think that it's fundamental to be able to demonstrate in orbit the new technologies. This is essential. You need to have a fast and agile loop, but demonstrated in orbit, to have it flying. To give you an example, concrete examples, we are putting together a program, for instance, that we call optical time synchronization time arranging, using optical communication for basically synchronizing the system, the entire system. And this is a very interesting concept, but it requires system studies and it requires to learn demonstrating it in orbit. So I think one of the fundamental pillars of our innovation, of technology pre-developments and is doing system studies, but also to be able to have the capability to demonstrate it in orbit. I think also about the quantum technologies of the future, artificial intelligence. By the way, José Angel is responsible in our team for that, and this is very important. It's not just sufficient to do a study. You need to fly it. You need to demonstrate it. And then to learn from it before introducing an operational system, because we know very well what was said before of a legacy and the compatibility. When you make a step, you need to be sure of what you are doing.
Yes, back there is.
Tim.
Hi, Marco. Tim Springer from Positim. That's a small company. It's my own company. We work a lot for ESA. I'm here as a user, though, so my question goes into the direction of interoperability. My dream as a user is that I can treat Galileo, GPS, BeiDou as one and the same systems. And they now have these interoperable signals for Galileo E1, E5. GPS has on the latest satellites L1, L5, and BeiDou has the same signals. But it turns out that with some receivers I can do it, and with others I can't. And I was wondering, how do you see your role as system provider Galileo to make sure that the receivers which are from industry are actually interoperable?
Well, at the time of the working group A with Mark Cruz, we were trying to define interoperability. And I think I see that we have it. If you would have GPS only in the city, it's more or less, medium-sized building cities were 50% of availability of 4 points. And with the addition of the other constellation, you get to 95, even close to 100%. And what else than calling it interoperability at user level?
What I maybe forgot. Still working? Okay. That is working. What I forgot to mention, maybe, I work in the highest accuracy, so I'm looking into ambiguity resolution between constellations. And that's, with some receivers it works, with some receiver brands you can actually do it. Of course, within one receiver brand you can do it, but across certain receiver brands it doesn't work. I was wondering whether you're actively looking into that and trying to talk to receiver manufacturers to get it working, or if that's something we should, I should be pushing industry myself, actually trying to, so that this works.
I get the point. I mean, we didn't go down to interoperability of the phase, the use of the phase, the ambiguity resolution between several systems, and I kindly invite the chairman of the working group A on both sides of the Atlantic to look at this topic.
Thank you. Lotfi to Dolph. We are looking at Celeste as the new in-orbit demonstration for LEO. LEO, of course, we foreseen potential 100 satellites. As of January this year, 7,000 of the 10,000 satellites in low Earth orbit are from SpaceX, and this comes from the capability to access space. So we are back to space, to access space, but we do not have the same capability. How do you foresee to actually bridge this gap in order then to place 100 of LEO satellites once the mission is demonstrated?
Yeah. Thanks for the very good question, because this is also another of the activities. It looks from your feedback that what we are doing in the future navigation program is in the right track. The idea is, the first is that we don't have yet the technology for we are doing in-orbit demonstrator at the moment, that we are doing it together. We have a contract with Thales and GMB for developing 5+5 satellites. You will see it also if you visit our booth here. They will be visible, and the team will be there also to talk about the LEO PNT. The point is that now we need to do the next step, and to bridge from technology point of view, to miniaturize as much as possible the navigation payload and to validate it in orbit. So we are going to have a so-called, we are proposing to our member states of the European Space Agency a new program called the LEO PNT in orbit preparatory phase, to have a phase of technology readiness and demonstration and in orbit validation in order to reach the technology. While in parallel, the European Union will launch activities to prepare for the operational system. So there is a complex technological development to be put in place. Because as you say, there is the challenge. There are constellations, but constellation of communication. The point is to be able to have the right ingredients from PNT point of view. We will have also to look in parallel, and I'm very happy of a session here at ION, looking at the fused PNT capabilities, integrating together PNT and communication aspects. This will be equally important. But technology and validation of technology is essential. When I was explaining in 95, when the ARTES program was approved, at the same time we were starting the technological pre-developments for our clocks and our signal generators, and this is essential. If you don't have technology, you are not able then to get operational.
Pietro Giordano from ISA. It was very nice to see the journey we all done. And I have a question for you. If you would go back in time, if you had the possibility to change something, what would you do differently?
You answer first.
One thing is to go back in time and have a completely new context that you can change. Another thing is if you cannot change the context. What I mean is, obviously, if we would be alone to be able to decide on the budget, on the ambition, if we don't need to convince ministers, if we don't need to speak to member states, we would do things much more efficiently and rapidly. We would still face all the technical problems we had, I guess. That's just part of the normal project. But we would have done the governance, the funding, all these things more efficiently. But this is the reality of these programs. You may change this program, but you cannot change the context around this program. You have to live with it. This is your challenge. So you have to navigate within this context. That context is more or less easy, more or less difficult. I think the key is the possibility to play between different organizations that have different roles, but in a coordinated manner. I think we try to show that in this presentation. So to always have somebody working to get the political support, to get the adoption, somebody working on the technical aspect, developing the technology, doing the things together. Yeah, maybe we could do things, I don't know, Marco, differently.
Well, one of the things, I will not change anything because it was a fantastic adventure. In the second, when we are going to work together in the next activities of the future, we will implement some lessons learned. But the point is, if I would go back, I would even push more on the user side. Because I think we need to couple more from the beginning with the user side. And I think, as you said, it started with the declaration of initial services. We were approaching more and more the chipset manufacturer. I think we need is fundamental, even more nowadays, that the user is at the center, meaning that the user has to contribute actively to the design of a system. So we have to launch not only requests for information on technology building blocks at payload level, but also on user receiver side. We need to know from the users their capabilities. This, I'm not complaining, but I will do more on that side.
I think we consulted some users in the beginning of the Galileo program, and they told us, no, you can't do anything different than a GPSCA code. Otherwise, it would be too complicated. So you also need to take a bit of distance to what you receive in that regard. Let's find the right balance.
This is Grace Gao from Stanford University. First of all, really, really great job presenting. Congratulations on all the nice achievement for Galileo. And you mentioned that this is not a smooth path, right? There was some bumpy road. And then, for example, you mentioned there was like one small component, only 50 cents, right? It was not right, and then that caused some failure. So looking forward, can you talk about how to better prepare for these unknowns so that hopefully, the forward path will be less bumpy?
I think it is always like this. Because my director tells me that when Javier, that is here, we did all of this together in all these years, he always tells me that, when you do things that are complex, like the ones we do, is unavoidable that you have challenges. Challenges are part of our job. There are problems every day. And the problems make you much stronger, much better. So don't avoid problems, face them constantly. So our job is very difficult. The thing is to keep the motivation of the teams at industrial level, at ESA level is essential. Because as I said, it's the passion. If those that don't have enough passion, they abandon. They cannot make it. It's a very hard job.
One thing you may want to work on and to consider is the agility of the development, validation, verification, and putting into operation all this cycle, if you can find ways that your setup is doing that in a way that is faster and more agile, I think it will help you a lot. Because you know that you will have problems, but if you have short cycle to solve this problem, this will help you a lot.
Another thing I was thinking while you were talking is that I forgot to say before about your question, Pietro, is the involvement of the operators soon in the development. This is something I remember. Delta System CDR, we failed because the operation was not yet ready and structured. It's very important to, and this goes back also to governance, the relationship, the different roles we have, to involve from the very beginning the user side and the operation side. This is essential. We also lagged a bit behind on that, and we have to do it for the new systems.
And probably test and test and test again.
Jimmy Wang from University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. Congratulations for the wonderful system. I just noted you mentioned there was a local component in Galileo design. What happened with that local component? What's the future plan for that?
No, in the end, first of all, what I want to say is not the effort of Jeremie and myself. This is work of teams that could make this achievement. This is very important. It's the work of the whole teams, European Commission, USPA, and European Space Agency in this. Now, the local component was basically introducing local augmentation locally. You could think it like, I don't know, sort of ILORAN nowadays. But for practical reasons, it was abandoned de facto. So we concentrated at a certain moment on the global component mainly. But this is going to come. I was today at the PNT summit. It's evident that for ensuring robust PNT, you will have more and more to fuse with local solutions, typical terrestrial solution like ILORAN is one of those, was discussed today.
We take one last one there. Yes.
Yes, hello, this is Tim speaking from Czech Republic, work for mathematics. There was just a question, looking back or going back in time, what would you do differently? Now let's jump into the future and looking ahead, 30 years ahead of today. Where do you think Galileo will be then? Will there actually still be Galileo? Will there still be GNSS, or will there be other technologies dominating PNT?
I think we are looking at complete new technologies that I think will revolutionize the PNT world. I just named three. One is quantum technology for PNT. I think it will be very important to look at it and to experiment with it, coming back to what Logan's saying, to have demonstrators of it in orbit. It is artificial intelligence also. We need to look at that, the capabilities to introduce more and more autonomy at the level of the operation of the satellites. And then the third, I think, an item we need to look at very closely is how PNT world and communication world are going to merge more and more into the future. For me, if I try to look forward on Earth, these are the directions, the main directions to shape the future.
I think there is a long life for global MEO constellation, because this is the backbone of timing and ranging. For all of the systems that will use them to augment it, like LEO PNT and others, indeed communication, navigation signal is a communication signal. It's just that it is adding the ranging information as an additional information. So definitely it would become natural that communication and navigation would be, let's say, blended and brought together. I think we'll come with 6G standards, like advanced features like authentication. We had this vision on the Galileo program. So the same thing that occurred on communication to advanced communication will happen, I think, to navigation. And they will follow same trends. But the MEO GNSS backbone, I'm convinced, will remain.
Jeremie, Marco, one day your grandchildren will talk to you, will ask you, Grandpa, what was the most remarkable moment over those 30 years? Emotionally, personally, for every one of you. If you have to remember a moment, for good and for bad, out of those 30 years.
For me, the position fix. The position fix because I believe as work as a system engineer in putting together different disciplines. You see, all these stories is not the success of a person, it's a success of a team with different disciplines bringing the result. And for me, the position fix was a fantastic adventure.
For me, it's when I was seeing the number of Galileo receivers coming and growing exponentially. That was just amazing.
Thank you very much.